We've had an election. Where does it leave us? Labor has a mandate. First, to not be Dutton, and second, to not be the LNP. Hello, I'm John August. I stood for the pirate branch of the Fusion Party at the last election in Bennelong. Today we live in a new political world where Australia turned its back on the LNP story, but it didn't exactly embrace Labor either. I've stood in the box seat of 6 elections, so I'm in a better position to sort of talk openly about what's happened. I'm not beholden to vested interests. I don't have to avoid a media pylon, and I don't have to worry about losing a constituency. So I can speak more openly about where this election leaves us. While having 2 political parties supposedly means we have a choice, in fact we just get lost in the morass. While the Greens are one alternative, they also have their blind spots too. As well as giving this box seat commentary, I also plan to show how Fusion are able to work towards an Australia that's better and fairer for all of us. I'll be building on some previous comment, and I'll be checking my notes, so not so much from memory this time. It's taken a bit longer than expected. I've been waylaid by a cold, and I guess life's also got in the way. So we're here now, the result of many different stories, some which fell flat and others that were sustained. Even though there were many lies and distortions during the campaign, their legacy endures, and what some of us see as obvious remains contested. Now, does Labor have a mandate? What about the other political parties? And there's my own political party, Fusion. We've been buffeted around too. Now, both looking at the election result and comparing it to elections long past, that's something we're going to have a look at, along with Labor's supposed mandate. Labor won quite well after preferences, but it hides the reality that fewer people voted for either Labor or Liberal. We have a result, but it's hardly a singing endorsement. While it doesn't look good for either party, Labor will pretend their endorsement is bigger than it actually is. And in any case, lots of people voted outside the major parties, and some for the Greens and Teals, and obviously some for Fusion as well. So there's quite a range of parties. Now, interestingly, apart from your Nationalist Party, a small but notable number of people voted to legalise cannabis. Of course, there's a few different parties endorsing reform here. In our case, we put out a video talking about how the laws around driving motor vehicles and cannabis interact. But the point is that a lot of people don't want to endorse the mainstream parties, and there's quite a diversity along those lines. So, along with many others, we're a part of that alternative, which shows that the supposed strength of the 2-party system is really only in our heads, not out there in the world around us. Now, this trend could continue, and at the next election it's quite possible that many new candidates will rise up, both independent and from smaller parties. And so your support in the next election will have even more impact. As a minor party, we're approached by many different groups wanting to promote their concerns, but why not get in touch with us well before an election? We hope our policies resonate, and it doesn't make sense to sort of embrace a whole lot of new things just immediately before an election. Now, I pushed back against sites which wanted to send us mass emails, like Do-Gooder, which can be overwhelming, particularly when people could just check out the policies on our website. Political spam in the modern age. Now, the most frustrating thing at a previous election was where I received emails demanding that I take action on Mr. Assange. Now, while our party has put out numerous media releases in support and run events in support. Now, I also wrote to Mr. Assange in Belmarsh Prison and was one of the few Sydney activists to receive a reply. Now, but it's easier to demand action in ignorance rather than actually take a little initiative yourself. You also have groups which summarise the different parties, but you do wonder if they're just feeders for the Greens. I know of one such site which misrepresented our commitment to freedom of speech. GetUp put out a report with some rather distorted and neurotic coverage of our own Fusion Party. Sure, it's good to put your own best foot forward, but I do shake my head when you see a level of organisation and support that belies the claim that you're a small, minor party. Maybe those summary sites are better than nothing, but they're no substitute for going out to try to make your own sense of what's going on. A vote for us might just better capture what you're concerned about, but regardless, it's better if you try to make your own sense of the world, whoever you end up voting for. Still, I'm not just trying to dump on the Greens or the Teals for that matter. While some criticise the Greens for their losses in the lower house, they performed pretty solidly in the Senate, suggesting people want something different locally. Maybe the Senate is about ideas in the fray, while local candidates are much more about representation, where you worry a bit more about exactly what they stand for. The one Teal upset result, Tim Wilson, was partly the result of his extra support from the Liberal Party at the cost of starving other candidates, which ultimately lost their seats. But the goal was the crown of unseating an existing Teal. Equally, Mr Wilson was a high-profile candidate the Libs thought they had more of a chance with, and he also separated himself from the main LNP campaign. And there are stories that he competed with the Teals in being able to establish a strong community connection. The Teals held their ground, doing moderately well in New South Wales, but losing seats elsewhere. The Libs claim they were Greens or Labor in disguise, but their record shows them often siding with the Libs on economic policy, so there is more to it. It's not about how much on the nose the LNP is. People frustrated with the LNP couldn't bring themselves to vote for Greens or Labor, but they could vote for a Teal. And the driving force was the credibility of the LNP as compared to the Teals, not whether the Teals were someone else in disguise. They could in fact be a little bit Greens or Labor tainted, just as long as they weren't the full deal, and that was something the LNP couldn't get. While some former Greens and Labor supporters voted Teal, in my view the thing that got them over the line were the former LNP supporters that jumped ship. To be sure, the appeal of the Teals has changed. It used to be focused on climate action, but now it's more the general appeal and credibility of the Teals compared to the LNP. There have been other shifts. Around the time of the COVID election, there were concerns about lockdowns, but at the same time, an appreciation that we are all in it together, with less emphasis on asset protection. And so-called woke issues were strangely absent, in spite of the noise in some places. They were not really important during that election, and they took a back seat during this last election. It seems, compared to economic issues, some see so-called woke issues as a distraction. Before there were Teals, you had candidates like Steggall and McGowan, where their push was incidentally around climate change. But in Steggall's case, it was the lack of progressive values on the part of Abbott, and in McGowan's case, the local candidate Mirabella was seen as disconnected with the on-the-ground concerns of voters, with an assurance that the LNP would look after assets no longer able to cut it. That forgives a few things, but eventually it can't support the weight. For sure, the Liberal Party does embrace some positive values of self-reliance, initiative and enterprise. They purchased copyright in the Aboriginal flag on behalf of all Australians, repurposed land for national parks, and took some positive steps around patents and medicine. I look back on the fateful election between Dr Hewson and Mr Keating and think I should have voted for Dr Hewson, as ultimately we Australians ended up with 4 terms of Howard. That election, though, had a feeling somewhat like the one we just went through. It wasn't a case of the two parties being, just the same, but either you were for or against Dr Hewson, and you're either for or against Dutton. But separately to Dr Hewson, I was impressed with Mr Turnbull, even as I stood against him in Wentworth. As other lefties were chucking rocks, I was saying, careful, we could end up with someone worse than Howard. And so, we got Abbott. But Nevertheless, the LNP are also about looking after your assets. I recall a corflute attached to a telegraph pole, something we in Fusion weren't able to do, which is why I remember it so well, proclaiming that life won't be easy under Albanese, with the S's replaced with $signs. That's the dark side of the Libs. Interestingly, when former Liberal voters jumped ship, the Libs accused them of being out-of-touch rich people, when previously it was fine to pander to the interests of rich people, so long as they voted Liberal. Another dark part of the LNP is the way they've been taken over by fundamentalists, both religious and economic. A friend who used to support the LNP said they'd gone weird on him. But you can see I have sympathy for some LNP ideas. LNP supporters sometimes, a bit brazenly, suggest I should join them. But my reply is I'm progressive in other ways and there's quite a divide. But really, I'm much more informed by left libertarian pirate values, which are different to the Libs and mean we can pursue innovative approaches that others are blind to. For all the positives the Libs have, they've also lost the plot. But equally, Labor can't see things clearly either. We in Fusion have that nuance. We haven't gone weird or lost the plot. And so, how will the LNP react? There's a narrative from the right-wing media that the Australian people were deceived. Well, if people vote for your own party for wrong reasons, well, look up to one side and whistle. But if people vote for the other party for bad reasons, that's hell to pay. Maybe Labor wrongly claimed that Dutton had it in for Medicare. Maybe the Libs got pensioners without any shares, worried about how franking credits would affect their financial future. Still, claiming Australians are stupid enough to be taken in by the other side's propaganda is a strange thing to say. But if you're desperate for an answer and want to avoid blaming yourself, I suppose it's the least worst option. Still, on the face of it, Lay has a better attitude as compared to the out-of-touch right-wing cheer squad. But don't get me wrong. It's possible to be left and out of touch. Before the elections where Howard and Abbott won, social media was flooded with anti-LNP content. People were saying voters are so pissed off with Howard. But what they should have said was that people they knew who would never vote for Howard were now even more pissed off with Howard. Now, that's different to people who were previously willing to vote for Howard, who are now willing to actually change their vote. So you do need to get out more. Now, I sure didn't want them to win, but unlike other lefties, I could separate out what I would like to happen from what I thought was likely to happen. I saw it coming, and it did. Now, maybe you want to support your side, but when you see people totally losing their objectivity, it makes you shake your head. Maybe it's something you've seen. There was a time when the left didn't see wins by Howard or Abbott coming. But equally, there was a time when Middle Australia was starting to realise there was something sus about Abbott. The Knights and Dames thing gave a lot of people pause. But at the same time, you could talk to LNP supporters who mindlessly supported Abbott and couldn't see that there was any problem at all. And equally, while I don't agree with the LNP critique at the last election, some of Labor's claims didn't stack up. Don't risk Dutton. Well, some risks are worth taking. Maybe not Dutton, but it's not something to presume either. And nothing worthwhile is entirely without risk. There was the claim that a vote for our local Liberal candidate would mean a Dutton government. Well, it could if things were on a knife edge, but equally he could have been part of a Dutton opposition. You can't know in advance how things will work out, but Labor claimed to have a crystal ball. When you see just how Labor and Liberal have lost the plot, each in their own way, it does beg of an alternative. And indeed, many people didn't vote Labor or Liberal. I am, however, hoping you'll see the sort of view that we encapsulate in Fusion means we can surpass both Labor and Liberal to see problems clearly without getting lost in the oppositional conflict. Obviously, something that gets past the Liberal-Labor dance is better. Still, if we're trying to salvage something from the two-party system, if you give Labor too much ground, will you have an effective opposition? There may be the risk of Dutton, but the flip side is the risk of a hobbled opposition. Of course, maybe one candidate would be better in government or opposition, but that's a separate issue. Still, ultimately, you should vote for who you're comfortable with. Even if that's not us, for your own good reasons. Not because people are whispering in your ear about what might happen. I do have my critique of Labor, but it's not the LNP's. The flip side of a trashed opposition is a supposed Labor mandate. Many people who voted for Labor, either as first preference or further down the chain, would have their own ideas about what changes we should make. One important point is action on climate change, with Labor claiming to be reasonable, Greens wanting more done, and the Libs, along with the right-wing media, claiming Labor's carbon policies already cost too much. If you believe the Libertarians, some in the LNP still don't believe in human-induced climate change. I attended one of their discussions and put out a video challenging their points, which you can see below. But for me, rather than presuming a policy, the more interesting approach would be to work through exactly what we would want from a policy, and that seems to get lost in the noise. And so now we get a parade of Labor apologists saying Labor needs to be careful about what it does, the other side would be worse, and so on. Labor has, on the one side, done a good deal. Some people say the Labor has done a reasonable job and was never weak in the way the LNP claimed. At the same time, they've also disappointed a great many people in terms of what they promised or gave the impression they would do. And I think it's a valid criticism. You can, in fact, see a partisan Green and Labor clash in this tension. But just as we've surpassed the Labor-Liberal conflict, we in Fusion can see past this petty squabble. While Labor have their reasons for playing it safe, if they don't do something to impress the electorate, it's quite possible that votes outside the big two, or even the big three, will grow to the point where at the next election there'll be a breakout of smaller parties and independents. I hope Fusion will be amongst them. Regardless, it could be a very interesting time. Apart from this, how is Labor going to perform? The LNP had its robo-debt and Labor had its pink bats. Not so much the fault of Labor, but there were issues with aged care and childcare. The major parties would like us to believe that they've got it all under control, but it's strange how many things are just fine till suddenly they're not. There's a recurrent pattern. Crisis, inquiry. Maybe public attention will wane. Maybe some inexpensive changes will be made. Maybe money will be found at the expense of some other vital government function elsewhere. And so we set things up for another failure down the track, followed by another inquiry. Rinse and repeat. While some things are getting easier, others are getting harder. Long ago, an economist outlined how in a few decades all of the infrastructure budget would be taken up with maintenance, with nothing left to build anything new. That's not happened, but it's clear we've actually had to bear extra financial pressures. And we also hear stories of the productivity crisis. This is a reality, and it would do us all a lot of good if we faced up to it, rather than believing either major party had a magic fix. Fusion is able to face up to these problems without getting lost in the squabble that is the current excuse for how we run this country. So we reach the end, and thanks if you've gotten this far. I would have liked to have looked at the whole voting process and all that wasted paper and fewer options if you don't like any of the candidates on offer, and perhaps I'll say more about that one day too. I could have put up one of those graphics encouraging you to like and subscribe, but I won't. I'm annoyed by those websites with the choice between yes and maybe later, when the second option should really be no, off. That's part of a broader trend in shitification of the internet, dark patterns and so on, which I hope to say more about another time. Our world is one that alternates between government censorship and invasion of privacy on the one hand, and corporate abuse and manipulation on the other. With your help, we can push back against these trends and make both the world around us and the internet a more welcoming place. Still, it would be awfully nice of you if you did like or subscribe. And if you do comment politely, the chance I'll notice and engage with you is a lot better than the many other sites encouraging you to comment when all you're doing is just yelling into a well. If you're not already involved with Fusion, I hope you'll keep aware of what we're up to and maybe even join up or help. In any case, thanks for watching. Hope you have a productive day, and I'll leave you to it. Bye.